3 people have died and 6 more are injured following a school shooting out of Madison, Wisconsin. Police there arrived to the Abundant Life School within minutes after a second grader dialed 911. Of the 3 people killed, a teacher, a student, and the 15-year-old shooter who's now been identified as Natalie Rupnow. Investigators say she used a handgun to open fire during a study hall. Here's everything we know so far about the Madison, Wisconsin school shooting and what's ahead in this tragic case. Madison may be the capital city, but honestly, it's relatively small, with only 280,000 people. And the Abundant Life School on Madison's east side is even smaller, with only 420 total students. That's grades K through 12. According to its website, the school has a strong focus on academics, also with an emphasis on the Christian faith. And just 1 week before Christmas, tragedy struck. It was at 10:57 a.m. on Monday, December 16th, when the Dane County Dispatch received a shocking 911 phone call. It was a second-grade student on the line reporting an active shooter in their school. Madison police happened to be training nearby, so they reached the school only 3 minutes later. Immediately, officials rushed inside searching for the shooter, and they found her by 11:05 a.m. She'd had a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Along with the shooter, 1 teacher and 1 student also died. 6 other people were wounded in the shooting too, and at the time of this recording, 2 of them are still in critical condition. So far, we don't know the names and ages of those victims, but we are learning more about the shooter. That's 15-year-old Natalie Rupnow, who went by the name Samantha. It's still kind of unclear why. Investigators do say she used a handgun to carry out the shooting, but it's still unclear where she got the gun. Now, her family home has been searched, and so far, Madison officials say her parents are cooperating, and it doesn't appear that they've committed a crime. Her father was actually interviewed late Monday night. But we do know, based on the same father's social media, he and Natalie were part of the North Bristol Sportsman's Club, and that's a shooting range not far from Madison. So Natalie's dad reportedly posted pictures of what appears to be Natalie at this shooting range, so we know she's at least relatively comfortable with guns. Other pictures on his same account show Natalie smiling and posing with some dogs. She looks just like a normal teenager. Immediately, though, there have been some questions about how Rupnow identified. Here's how Madison Police Chief Sean Barnes replied late Monday night, quote, "I don't know whether the shooter was transgender or not. I don't think that whatever happened today has anything to do with how she or he or they may have wanted to identify. And I wish people would kind of leave their own personal biases out of this. So whether or not she was, he was, they were transgender is something that may come out later. But for what we're doing right now, today, literally 8 hours after a mass shooting in a school in Madison, it is of no consequence at this time." Madison police have also addressed the reported manifesto written by the shooter, and officials say they're aware of this document but can't yet verify that it's authentic. For now, that means the motive still remains a mystery. Hey, if you're out and about multitasking while you're watching my video, stop and listen. I have to tell you about this new app called Upside that gets you free cash back on daily essentials. I now use Upside every time I pump my gas because it's easy and it's free and you get cash back. All you have to do is download the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. Just pay as usual and simply follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. So to take a closer look at the case as we know it right now, we're going to bring on mass shooting expert Dr. Jonathan Metzl of Vanderbilt University. Thank you for coming on with us under such terrible circumstances.
Glad to be here.
This shooting right out of the gate is different than the ones we usually cover simply because it's a female shooter. That just makes it so out of the ordinary. I wasn't expecting that. What are your thoughts?
Mass shootings become murderous expressions of grievance, and certainly we've seen them. They're mostly men. I mean, historically, that's true. They're mostly white men in these kind of instances. But as guns become more readily available, and as people see this as a way of going down in a blaze or righting the wrongs that they're facing, I'm not surprised that we're seeing more and different kinds of shooters. And so I've been kind of waiting for a shooting like this. We've had many, many, many straight white male shooters, but then we've had trans shooters, black shooters, and now we have, I think, our third or fourth women mass shooter. And so it's just a sign that this is happening more frequently. We have more than one mass shooting a day in the United States. And unfortunately and tragically, it doesn't just limit itself to any one identity group.
I think the question on everyone's mind too is why? What is the motive that created such a tragedy? And right now, officials in Madison are saying, we're not sure yet. So, how does all of that work? The investigation to find out why this young girl would have opened fire in her own school?
A lot of times we spend years trying to answer that question. My book, What We've Become, is about the Waffle House mass shooting. I spent 5 years trying to ask that question about Waffle House, and there was tons of footage and tons of um, footage of the shooter before and court testimony. And I still struggle with that question. Really, a lot of times we have to admit that we don't know. I mean, people suffer um, threats or insults at school or at workplace or in other places that these happen all the time, and they don't go on to kill somebody else. So what causes one person to snap when it's so many other people have the same kind of pressure and they don't do so? Now in this case, we're recording this only a day out, and so I would just say that the important thing for investigators and for the public is to sift through. Really, the question now is what's real and what's chatter, what's static, because there's so much misinformation. I know there's been talk that there was a manifesto out there. I don't know if that's real. I'm sure we'll be finding a lot more about the shooter's history, about her access to firearms. All those things are super important. Um, but ultimately, why today and not 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago? What exactly happened? Because I think the other important thing to realize is that even though in the popular imagination, it's like somebody snapped and that's what happened. But a lot of times, what you find in shooters is that they've been feeling grievance for years. They've had character problems, personality problems, issues like that. And so, why on one day and not on many of the other days that they were having a similar emotion? What happened on this day? And I guess the facts will come out. And again, it's just important to kind of separate the truth from the disinformation.
You're right to say that this is a case with developments almost hourly. Yesterday was the day of the shooting, and I was watching the live streams of local stations, and it was hourly, minute by minute, we're learning new details. So you're right, new things could come out as this story progresses. But what I have seen reported so far, we don't know that much about her background, but I have seen social media posts from her dad that she was at a shooting range, a picture of it. Now, I'm from Wisconsin, literally this exact county, and that's very common. I mean, hunter safety is age 12. A lot of kids have guns even at that age. A lot are very comfortable with guns. How does that play into this? If this young girl had access to weaponry and was comfortable shooting, and then she carried out this mass shooting, how does all of that factor in?
Well, you could argue two sides of that, right? On one hand, it's obviously the case that mass shootings don't happen in places where people don't have access to guns. And so you don't see shootings like this really in much of the rest of the world because there aren't guns around or available. And so on one hand, you could say that having tons of guns around is a problem in cases like this. It highlights a certain problem, which is maybe that we have made it too easy for people to get guns, or parents are not responsible about locking up their guns, or any other issue that I think will be important to look at. And I think the flip side is you could argue the other side kind of mathematically, which is that there are many people who have guns and they don't go on to shoot anybody, and so it's not like we want to pathologize all gun owners or gun culture or something like that. It's really this case. And I think the third part of this particular issue is, I know from my book and from other research that there are family dynamics a lot of times in cases like this, particular family uh, relationships around guns, tension around guns. A lot of times, mass shooters have gotten their guns from their parents or stolen their guns from their parents. And I also, again, I don't know if this is true or not, but at least if that manifesto that's circulating now is real, there's also a lot of copycat of getting quote unquote inspiration from other shooters. And so all those things I think are important to play a part, and we'll have to see. I know in my book, about my book was about the Waffle House shooting. The father of Travis Ranking, Jeff Ranking, kept giving guns back to his son, even when flashing warning signs were clear, and even after he was not supposed to be legally giving him his guns back, and Jeff Ranking went to jail for that. And so the question is, were those warning signs true here? What was the family's response, and was there any culpability in that regard also?
I mean, gun legislation is a hot button topic no matter what state you're in across the country. But you're right that the discourse in Wisconsin is huge because a lot of people hunt for sport. And a lot of people who have these weapons don't go on to commit murder or fire them in a place that they shouldn't be firing them. So, if that's the case, and her father had these guns because we know that he was an enthusiast, let's say he was a hunter. My dad was a hunter, very common in Wisconsin. How does that factor in? I mean, I know that investigators are looking through their home. They said that the parents are cooperative. It doesn't appear that they've committed any crimes or handed the guns over, but will investigators be taking a closer look at the parents and their history with guns?
It depends what warning signs there were in the past. I know, again, just using the Waffle House example this was in Illinois. Illinois had reasonably strict gun laws, and then there were at least five police contacts in the book I wrote about where the police said you shouldn't be giving the gun back to your son, including an FBI contact where the shooter tried to jump the fence at the White House. And so there was a long legal trail. And that is also true in other, I would say, often blue state mass shootings where parents are held culpable. I know, for example, in Michigan, there was a school shooter whose parents had received multiple warnings from the school and then ended up giving the gun back and taking their son to target practice, giving him a gun for a present. And so the question, I think, will be twofold. One, what warning signs were there? Were there any kind of, what we would call red flags that the parents overlooked? Um, or was this the case that the shooter stole the guns from the house, which is a different kind of story? And then the other part is, of course, a state with very, very loose gun laws makes it harder to find culpability in the parents. And so I would say all those things are going to play out as we get more information here.
That's definitely something we're going to want to look at, see what information comes out. And as you said, it's going to come out days, weeks, months, maybe even years down the line. But one of the questions, too, that a lot of people are thinking is that this was a school that focused on Christian learning. It was a religious school. And this happened about a week away from Christmas. Is that possibly involved in some sort of motive, the connection between religion and this upcoming really important Christian holiday?
Yeah, we again, we have no idea at this point. I think we should keep an open mind about everything, but I just want to be clear, there's nothing about Christian schooling that causes people to commit mass shootings. And so I think what we want to be careful of is saying, here's a thing we know about the shooter's identity or life experience, and therefore that's what caused the mass shooting. That's sometimes how our brain works. But we should push back on that, I think, because Christian theology is largely peaceful, and certainly there's no theology that would advocate for this on a kind of mainstream level. And so it's really, I guess, the question would be, for me personally, and not knowing anything about this case, I would take Christian out of it and just say schooling. What happened at school? Because tensions happen at school all the time. Was there something that happened at the school that set this off? Some kind of pressure, conflict, something like that. But again, I think we want to be careful and say that on one hand, we want to know everything we can about the shooter and the school, the ideology of the family, the issues are all important. But what we want to be careful of is, and therefore that's what caused this shooting, because again, we really don't know.
You're right. We've been talking a lot about the shooter because honestly, that's where our minds go. This is the person who carried out this really heinous crime. But I want to focus on the other people involved. There were people who were killed, others still in critical condition. And all of the faculty, all of the students, even people who live nearby will likely suffer from the trauma and the fallout. I want to focus on that now. What will that look like for those people coming to terms with their life after the shooting?
It's never going to be the same, unfortunately. I mean, people lost their lives or grievously injured. Communities will always identify this site as the site where something horrific happened. People won't feel safe. They hear a loud noise, they'll jump for cover. So I know this from studying traumatized communities. Before and after are really different. You lose your sense of safety, and some people actually of course, lose their lives or suffer injuries for the rest of their lives, but just the sense of safety, which to me is the bigger level tragedy of mass shootings in America. We shouldn't have to drop off our kids at school and wonder if they're going to come home, or go to the office and wonder if you're going to make it back that day, or so many other locations that these horrible shootings have happened. And so we have a very traumatized society because of these shootings. And I wish we would all come together across political divides to figure out some way to stop them, because I personally feel, as a researcher in this, that there's no one side that has the answer to how to fix this. More guns aren't going to fix it. More regulations in places where there already are tons of guns aren't going to fix it. It really is a community project. And I think what we have to do is work together across divides to try to figure out a better way forward than what we're facing. But I also know, again, that when people lose their sense of safety in places they should feel safe, it really changes the way they view their lives, whether or not they even carry guns in the future, or whether or not they feel safe dropping off their kids at school. And so the tragedy is human, but it's also a tragedy of civic space.
And it's really affecting so many people across the country, the victims who are there, obviously. But when people hear the numbers of the mass shooting and the tragic information that we're learning here, it's really hard to stomach. For me personally, I'm from Madison. So immediately when I heard this, heartbreaking. I've driven by that school. I know where it is. And to me, Madison's a pretty small town, 250,000 people. It's a city, but it's kind of like a town. Does that show that this could happen anywhere, even in a small place where we ordinarily feel safe? This could happen anywhere in America.
There's some literature that shows that cities or states with tighter gun laws that are surrounded by other states with tighter gun laws have fewer mass shootings. So I think I don't want to say that common sense gun regulation does nothing. It actually has been shown, I think, in a number of studies to reduce all kinds of shootings. So mass shootings are just one of any kind of shooting. And so I think the looser the state's gun laws are, the more guns there are, and the more guns there are, the more shootings there are. And so I think that there's an important policy and legal part of this. And it's just factually true that there are fewer of many kinds of shootings in blue states with tight gun laws than red states with loose gun laws, or purple states, as is the case here. Now, that being said, it's very easy to get a gun in this country. You can drive across state lines and get a gun. You can get a gun at a gun show. There's 10 zillion loopholes that we have tried to close. And then, as we saw in the shooting in New York last week, you can also just make your own gun. So there are many ghost guns that are untraceable and are um, harder to regulate in a way. I think we need to do a better job of that. And so in a way, it's just that the more guns there are, the more shootings you're going to see. And we've known that really since the 90s, in medical literature, and obviously much longer than that from a common sense standpoint. And so I really think that's going to be the issue: is, are we really ready to come together? Is there any kind of tragedy that will make us think that spaces that should be safe, common civic spaces like workplaces or schools in particular, is there a way we can come together across our divides and figure out what's worked? Because it's not like they have these shootings everywhere in the world, and so there are models out there for safety that I think that we can follow.
This one really hits close to home. It's a tough one to talk about, but Dr. Jonathan Metzl, thanks for coming on and discussing this really difficult topic with us.
Thanks so much.
Those are the details as we know them right now at the time of this recording, but we'll continue to follow the story out of Madison, Wisconsin for all the new developments. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.